Good evening and welcome to Chamber Chat. My name is Melissa Vance. I'm the president and CEO of the Wayne County Area Chamber of Commerce, and we're glad that you've tuned in. This month, we are continuing our time with the annual legislative luncheon that was held on site at Reed Health last month. Last month, you were able to hear from our national representative from the U.S. Chamber, as well as a representative from the Indiana Chamber. And Jason Bearce from the Indiana Chamber will be continuing on tonight's show, talking all things state level and the initiatives that are going on right now as our state legislature is currently in session. Enjoy. If you have any follow-up questions or would like to contact us with more information, feel free to reach out to our office at any time.
What I'm really here to talk about today, which is our legislative priorities. Our chamber, we field a full government affairs team on all the kind of major issues. My issues are education and workforce, but my colleagues who are who lead on other issues, their contact information is on there as well. And so if you have questions that go a little bit deeper than my direct knowledge, be happy to connect you with one of my colleagues.
You mentioned next level jobs. I know you've been involved in the internet.
Yep.
Can you speak to that and what are some of the statistics and how much of that program may be utilized?
More and more all the time, and thank you for the great opportunity to talk more about things that we're doing. I appreciate it. So do you want me to talk about next level jobs first, or do you want me to talk about Indian Internet first?
Indiana.
Okay. Yeah, if you're not aware, Indian Internet is the state's matching platform for helping employers and students connect for work-based learning opportunities. One thing, if you're aware of Internet, great. If you're not, we'd like to get you connected. It's Indiana Internet, internet.net, which is one of the reasons why we're changing the name. And part of the reason why we're in the midst of going through a rebranding process for that is not just so I don't have to stumble over that name anymore, although sometimes people think it's actually the internet, which I joke, I wish we controlled the internet. It would be a more stable revenue source for us, but is that we're actually broadening the focus of that group to not just be focused on collegiate level internships and not even be focused on internships, period. We think there's a broader array of meaningful work-based learning opportunities that we want to help connect students and employers to. But one part of that is our platform is the vehicle for connecting students and employers to the Earn Indiana program, which, if you're not familiar with that, is the state's work-study program for low-income students. What that means for employers is that it basically provides a 50% cost subsidy for the compensation costs. So, if you're paying an employer $10 an hour and that meets the criteria of being a meaningful internship and you're hiring a low-income student, the state's going to cover half that cost, so it's going to be $5 an hour for you. So it's really a win-win for employers as well as for students. Last session we received the opportunity to expand that to high school age students as well. We hear increasingly that part of tapping into that talent pipeline, the earlier the better. We know that there's concerns from employers often around liability and related issues. Come to find out, most of those issues are more misconceptions than reality. With very few exceptions, the same work that somebody over 18 can do, somebody under 18 can do. The Department of Labor has some pretty lengthy and often confusing standards, which I think is part of the barrier that we're trying to address. But with a couple exceptions like meat slicer and a couple of things, pretty much anything that somebody who's 18 or older can do, younger students can do. But long-winded way of saying that we're really trying to expand on multiple fronts to increase that opportunity to students at different levels, but also to employers at different levels. We average right now about 1,000 confirmed placements per year. We think it's actually in advance of that or beyond that, but one of the challenges we have is closing that feedback loop, because unless they're receiving that state source of support, there's not always the same incentive either on the employer side or the student side to close the loop, but we've got literally thousands of students and hundreds of employers on the platform at any given time, and we're trying to help make those connections to really help students get the experience they need that we think will lead to a more fulfilling career, and employers tap into that talent. Did that give you enough to go on? And thank you for that opportunity to talk a bit more about internet. So first on the list, regional quality of place. This is back to that first slide I had around the fact that more and more employers are recognizing that quality of place issues can be a detriment. This is our attempt to sort of, if you're familiar with the Regional Cities Initiative, which was one-time money from a tax amnesty program that's since dried up, sort of our attempt to try to kind of move that ball forward with Regional Cities 2.0, if you will, and really creating a mechanism that will allow cities to pool resources from the private sector and others so they can help do those things on a more regional basis, because it's clear that many of these local solutions are really need to be regional solutions. And if we're going to make the places that we want to attract businesses, places that people want to be and live, work, and play, we really need regional solutions, and this is one thing that we're trying to advance this session. Related to economic development, professional licensing, we're looking at opportunities to reduce or eliminate what we consider unnecessary professional licensing requirements. This will be outside of health and safety areas, but really the way it typically works in India right now is if we don't have a reciprocity agreement with another state where they're recognizing our licensed individuals and we're recognizing their licensed individuals, that recognition is not happening. So that's more red tape and hurdles for people who are coming to this state to be able to do the work they've done elsewhere in Indiana. And so we're looking, it's sort of an initial step to give the licensing agencies the opportunity to lift some of those restrictions, regardless of whether there's a reciprocity agreement in place, recognizing that we want to preserve standards, but we want to eliminate any hurdle that might hinder talent attraction and bringing more people Indiana. I am encouraged to report, though, for the first time in recent memory in the last year or two, we've actually had a net migration of people into the state, which wasn't always the case. Our governor loves to talk about that, and that's a really great story to tell. But we think any barriers that we can eliminate that'll make it easier for people with the knowledge and skills we need to drive our economy forward, we'd like to do that, and that's what this proposal is about. Next, moving on to education and workforce. I had the opportunity to sit on a school accountability panel this summer to look at our current accountability system and see if there are ways that we could strengthen it to make it more meaningful for students. If you're all familiar with how that system works right now, it's primarily based around test scores and graduation rates. The grand bargain we were trying to strike was perhaps de-emphasizing standardized test scores as the primary measure for school and student success, and replace that with things that we think are more relevant to students' long-term success and as well as the community. So things like industry-recognized credentials, enrolling in post-secondary education without the need for remediation, military service, all of those things being pathways that either give students a credential that they can take in the marketplace that will lead to a better job, or at least on a path to doing that. It's unclear at this point what is going to change over the next year in this regard. This is really on here more for us to restate our priorities as a chamber, and that we believe there are aspects of the current accountability system that warrant preserving, including the clarity that comes from that A through F grading scale and the comparability from school to school, but we do think there's some room for improvement. But to the extent that this becomes a legislative issue this session, which is still an open question, we just wanted to state what our position and what our prerogatives were on that issue. Secondarily, our other education workforce issue for this session is the FAFSA. Are the parents in the room familiar with the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid? Maybe you have some form of PTSD as a result of having to fill that out with your students. We don't know that it's always recognized this way, but from our chamber perspective, this is a workforce development issue, and that we have a significant number of students every year that are leaving money on the table that could help them not just go to a traditional 2 or 4 year college, but those industry recognized credentials I mentioned earlier through the governor's Next Level Jobs program. How that program works and how we're able to sustain at the state level is it leverages federal dollars, Pell dollars first before applying the state dollars. So if the student has a significant financial need, it's going to cost Indiana relatively little to nothing, but they have to file the FAFSA. And that's something that is not happening at the rate that we think it should. A couple other states are ahead of us in this regard, making this a high school graduation requirement with an opt-out, and quick to point out, with an opt-out, so that the parent could opt their student out if they say that post-secondary education or some equivalent is not their plan, that's fine, or a principal could say extenuating circumstances prevent this student from completing this form. But we really think that it should be an opt-out as opposed to an opt-in, is what we're seeing right now. And the reality is low-income students are the least likely to fill this form out. The FAFSA is also how students get merit-based scholarships. So if you look at our high school FAFSA rates across the state, generally speaking, the more affluent the community, the higher their FAFSA filing rate is, which is, of course, kind of the opposite of what you expect to see, because Indiana is actually one of the most generous states in need-based financial aid. We're fourth nationally, and so if there's any state that there's a reason for, if not every student, but the vast majority of students to fill it out, Indiana is that state. And we're taking the long view on this, that 99% of the jobs since the recession have required at least some sort of education and training beyond high school, and this is really one of the best ways for students to get that without accruing unnecessary college debt. So we pushed for this last session, made it through House, stalled in the Senate. As my boss, Kevin Brenniger, often reminds us, it often takes only 1 year to pass bad legislation and 2 or more years to pass good legislation, so we're going to make another run up the hill this session on that. Next, moving on to energy. Employers the business community are the state's largest consumer of energy, so it's not surprising that this is a really key priority for us. And we've seen some trending in a not positive direction in this regard over the last few years, that dropped from being 5th lowest in energy costs to 28th lowest nationally. And part of that's about the ongoing diversification and move away from coal. But this is an area that we're really looking at a more diverse and approach, and we're doing a study as part of this to help put some good information out there to help lawmakers, policymakers, other folks really kind of move this forward in a productive way that supports a sustainable long-term energy plan for the state. Related, water. We need electricity. We also need water. And we know that there are challenges in this regard, particularly in different parts of the state. Like we did with we're doing right now with the energy study. The Chamber did a water study a few years ago that's really helped kind of lay the groundwork, so we have better data about what's actually happening, but we now need to move the ball forward in terms of what we're doing about the water issue. The Indiana Finance Authority study showed that the immediate cost of drinking water infrastructure improvement need to be $2.3 billion and an additional $815 million a year thereafter. So there's significant need in this regard, and we just want to do more to shine the light on this. And obviously access to water is a jobs and economic development issue, and so it's something that we're going to be continuing to push for in this session and beyond. Next. There probably has been no issue that's received more attention recently than issues related to smoking and vaping in particular. This is something our chamber has been advocating for a period of time, to raise the smoking and vaping age from 18 to 21, institute a tax on vaping products. As of right now, there is no tax on vaping products, and increasing the cigarette tax to $2 per pack from 99.5 cents per pack, which we actually have one of the lowest cigarette taxes in the country. Even tobacco-rich Kentucky charges more than we do at over $1. But we're really viewing this as ways to provide a disincentive for individuals starting smoking. I know there's been a lot of controversy around vaping, and I think it was initially viewed as a smoking cessation strategy, and we're seeing it's not exactly working out that way in many respects. A lot of people are vaping are also smoking. A lot of people start vaping, switch to smoking, and of course most devastating of all is just the dramatic increase we're seeing in young people who are vaping. And we were concerned about this prior to the more recent news about the deaths resulting from that. So if I joke that smoking is one of the leading causes of statistics, and this is no different. I mean, there's any number that we can share, but I think the one that really rings home for us is that we're spending more than $6 billion annually on healthcare costs related to smoking and related issues here at Reed. And we know that that's an issue that they're grappling with, and then we know that the younger people start, the most likely they are to be lifelong smokers. And so fortunately, we're seeing increasing agreement about doing something on this issue, both the state and federal level. And so we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to see some movement in this regard this session. The governor's made this a priority. The legislative leadership in both houses indicated this is a priority. And we might even see some action on the federal level in this regard. Maybe my colleague will know a little bit more about that. Another issue that there seems to be broad consensus that we need to do something about is ending the practice of surprise billing, where somebody thinks they're going in network and somebody who is part of their health solution was out of network and they get this exorbitant bill that they didn't see coming. This is something that we've heard from the governor and legislative leadership here in the state, that this is going to be a priority this session. And even more recently, there's been some suggestion that Congress might take this up before the holidays. So we think this is a reasonable change that needs to be made, and we're cautiously optimistic that something will happen to it, because certainly we don't want to drive up medical costs any more than they already are. Next, unemployment insurance. Employers pay into the unemployment insurance fund for individuals who are displaced or laid off, not quit or fired. Last session, our Department of Workforce Development floated a proposal that would have resulted in a pretty significant rate increase for employers to try and to build that fund back up. We advocated against that. We thought that was a little too immediate and disruptive, but what we do think, and what we will be advocating for this session, is to extend the current Schedule E classification. So basically extend the current rates beyond 2020. They actually expire here soon in 2020. So at a minimum, the legislature is going to have to extend that in some fashion beyond 2020. We are advocating that they would extend that to 2025, just to provide some certainty among the employer community about what rates they're going to be paying, but also potentially look at establishing some sort of rate triggers that if the fund falls below a certain amount, there would be a slight increase, but that would be predictable, so employers aren't suddenly faced with a significant rate increase. A couple areas that are additional areas of focus, less at the top of our priority list. First around with IDEM, the Department of Environmental Management's excess liability trust fund that's really been drained in recent years, in part because the cost of doing cleanup for these leaking underground storage tanks costs significantly more in Indiana, apparently in part because there's maybe one vendor that's kind of cornered the market on this and charging accordingly. So this is something that we're going to be looking at as something that we can look towards a more long-term sustainable solution. Similarly, providing transparency in asbestos trust claims, so that there's a national trust fund that pays for this, but then employers often would be could be cited in separate litigation. And what we would advocate for is just there being transparency for the courts when they're deciding what these awards would be, at least be aware of what other funds have already been given to these individuals, as they take into consideration what additional damages they might give in that regard. Next, reining in costs associated with ambulatory surgical centers and worker compensation claims. There'd been some work to sort of cap those claims at some levels in a traditional hospital setting, but what we've seen over time is some of those services have kind of gravitated over to these surgical centers where there aren't those same restrictions in place, and so it's kind of a robbing Peter to pay Paul type thing. So we think that kind of extending the same policy to these additional surgical centers is something that the legislature should be thinking about, since it has such a direct impact on worker compensation rates. Few last been opposing the legalization of both medical and recreational marijuana in Indiana. The employer community in Indiana has been pretty unanimous in saying this is something that we'd like to preserve, even as some of our neighboring states are going the other direction. also supporting any and all policies we can to continue that trend to have more people coming into the state and reducing the number of residents who are moving outside of the state, particularly those who come with the knowledge and skills we need to drive our economy forward. And we, as always, will be continuing to look at all the funds the state spends on workforce development, all its forms, and making sure that that is being allocated in a way that it's having the intended result and providing the return on investment that we really want to see. And then I believe this is almost my last slide. You've hung with me. Supporting, maintaining, enhancing our attractive tax climate. We're consistently ranked among the top 5 states for having a tax-friendly, regulatory-friendly, and business-friendly environment. That didn't happen by accident. Groups like our chamber and others really advocated to make that happen, and we want to continue to preserve that. Continuing to support making technology innovation an integral part of the state's identity. I think increasingly we're being looked at as sort of a Silicon Valley of the Midwest, but we're not where we need to be yet, and we want to continue to build in that regard. And last but not least, supporting meaningful township government reform and looking for opportunities for additional efficiency that will ensure accountability, but also minimize the expense to the taxpayer. And with that, just leave you with a couple of final things. One, every year the Chamber publishes a legislative directory. If you don't know who your legislators are or how to contact them, it's all right there at your fingertips. This year we also have that in the form of a digital phone app, so another way for you to connect. Do you want to open it up to questions now?
I've always heard that Indiana's largest exporter is college graduates, and I was wondering, in light of the need for filling jobs here in Indiana, have those statistics improved? Are we younger college graduates staying in Indiana?
That has improved over time. We're not where we need to be, and we think that, again, back to that slide about encouraging more intentional connections between education institutions and employers. The sooner we can connect them, get them a job here, get them to stay here, there's a likelihood that they're going to like it here and stay here. But the encouraging part is those trends have improved, but there's still room for additional improvement.
On your introductory slides, is there a place we can go and see those statistics? And are there any places where we can see like you had 2018, 19, a lot of times there are places where we can see trends further than that?
Yeah, it's on our website is the short answer. We have a press release and links to this year's survey and past surveys. I don't know off the top of my head how many years back it goes, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and provide additional information. And as I said, there's actually a significantly greater number of data points I didn't share just for time today, but a lot of interesting information for us to unpack, and we think that hopefully will help make some connections. Yes, sir.
With the possible expansion of your internship program into the high school ranks and encouraging businesses to partner with school districts, one of the challenges we face here is we're about 80% free or reduced lunch, so at-risk students. And when those students get into those internship programs, which we have a couple of really good partners here in our community, and they start to earn money, their parents or whoever they're living with, grandma, grandpa, whoever it may be, lose the supports that they're getting from the state when they start making money. Is there any thought?
The benefits cliff and things.
Yeah.
It's a real issue, and it's one that we're looking at. We've been talking to the governor's workforce cabinet and others about, we don't want to inadvertently create disincentives for people to raise their station. And so, yes is the short answer. I think there's still not clarity on exactly how we're going to resolve that, but it's something that a lot of people are looking at, so it's a fair point. Other questions?
Well, just a couple follow-ups to share with you all in regard to what our local chamber does and how we work together with the U.S. Chamber and the Indiana Chamber. A couple examples just from this past year in discussions about House Bill 566, which talks about housing infrastructure and how we can boost our housing in areas where there's a lack thereof, like ours. And Representative Barrett did some work on this, and we appreciate that. But reaching out to the folks at the Indiana Chamber, and even though that bill wasn't on their list of priorities for the year, they were able to go in on our behalf and make a statement that it was good for the businesses in Indiana and support that. And so we appreciate them taking that on, even though it wasn't on their list of priorities, and helping get that through this past year. And then also on the national level, one of the topics that we all continue to hear locally is the cost of healthcare, especially for small businesses, and how we can create a better system there. And previously, chambers were able to have association health plans where we were able to pull together a health plan, a group health plan of various industries by virtue of being members, and decrease costs hopefully for everyone. And that was something that was not able to occur because of federal legislation. And over this past year, U.S. Chamber has been working on that, and a rule was passed that allowed chambers to do that locally. And then there was some legal things that kind of held that up for a while. But we appreciate the U.S. Chamber working on that, so that hopefully we can begin to have those conversations on how we can pull together a plan here and affect our local businesses. So for those reasons, just in 2019, we feel very strongly about our relationships with both organizations, and we appreciate what you're doing in your realm. Helps us be able to continue doing what we do here. So we thank you for that, and please pass that on to your colleagues.